Hello and welcome. I truly appreciate you being here. And if you feel like subscribing to the channel, just know it would mean a great deal to me. Let's get into it. I'm Nathaniel. When the divorce papers were signed and everything became official, I thought I'd be ready. After all, I'd watched our relationship erode quietly for over a year. But the emptiness that followed was something I hadn't braced for. That night, I checked into a low-cost motel. While I stood waiting at the front desk, the woman behind the counter looked up and said something that would reframe everything I thought I understood about those final years. I remember exactly when Erica told me she was ending our marriage. It was a typical Wednesday, not remarkable in any way. I came home from work exhausted, anticipating the same muted silence that had become routine. But as I walked in, there she was, sitting upright on the couch, fingers locked together, like she'd been mentally rehearsing a script. There was no warm greeting, no casual chit-chat. She went straight into it. "This isn't working." "You know that," she said, like she'd been repeating those words to herself for weeks. I froze in place, unsure how to react, trying to decode her expression. Was she angry? Was she hurting? Was this real? But she was unnervingly calm. I didn't know what to say. Before I could form a response, she reached under the coffee table and pulled out a folder. Inside were carefully organized divorce papers. She told me she had already hired an attorney. There wouldn't be any courtroom drama, no kids, no financial mess. "Your lawyer can talk to mine," she said. "Let's keep this clean." I stood there, wordless. I wanted to argue, to push back, but her eyes told me it was already over. Not emotionally, completely. She'd already moved on. So I nodded. What else was there to do? I agreed to find a lawyer, but inside, all I could ask myself was, how did we get here? Despite all the signs, I had believed we could still make it, that staying meant loving each other through the hard parts. But for her, love ended when it became more burden than bond. I lay awake that night, replaying everything. The truth is, it hadn't fallen apart all at once. It had been a slow erosion. At first, I told myself it was a phase. Don't most couples go through rough spots? But over time, we drifted, until we were little more than strangers occupying the same house. The first major warning sign came on a Friday. Erica had started going out more often, saying she needed nights with the girls. I didn't think much of it initially, but it became routine, every Friday. What disturbed me wasn't the frequency, but the way she changed. She began dressing up more, tighter clothes, bold perfume, sky-high heels, and she'd return drunk, often barely coherent. When I tried to talk to her about it, she dismissed me like I was being irrational or possessive. By the third time, I drew a line. I told her plainly, if she walked out again like that, she shouldn't expect to come back as my wife. I wasn't trying to control her, I was desperate to salvage what remained. But she took it as an attack. Her response was venomous. She called me pathetic and said if I spent half as much energy making money as I did criticizing her, maybe our lives wouldn't be so boring. It was the first time she had spoken to me with that kind of cruelty. Something inside me cracked that night. Things deteriorated fast after that. Home turned into a battlefield of silence and contempt. Nothing I did was good enough. Even being in the same room seemed to aggravate her. When she looked at me, it was with this cold frustration, like I was the anchor keeping her from a life she believed she deserved. Again and again, she reminded me, she hadn't signed up for mediocre. That word, mediocre, began to haunt me, as if being stable, reliable, and loyal was something shameful. Oddly, she'd never complained about our lifestyle before. We weren't wealthy, but we were steady. Bills paid, fridge full. I didn't know what had changed, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. By the time she handed me the divorce paperwork, we were already sleeping beside each other like strangers. We barely spoke beyond functional updates. What time's the appointment? Where are the keys? I still tried to connect, to bridge the gap, but there was nothing left between us. So no, it wasn't one defining moment that broke us. It was the long, quiet unraveling. And in the end, the only thing we truly shared was the silence. After she asked for the divorce, things moved fast on paper, but internally everything slowed down. I hired a lawyer, clinging to some naive hope she might change her mind. But she never looked back. Each time we spoke, she was clear, composed, like she'd emotionally checked out long before I had. She said she didn't want anything from me. Then she asked if she could keep the apartment, said it made her feel at peace, that it felt like home. I wasn't sure which part hurt more, her wanting the apartment or realizing she was more attached to the space than to me. My lawyer was ready to challenge it, to fight for what was mine. But I just sat there, staring at the floor, numb. What would be the point? Even before I left, that apartment had stopped feeling like mine. I told the lawyer to let it go. She could have it. I wasn't going to go to war over bricks and memories. I wanted out, with my sanity intact. She kept the apartment. I walked away with my car and some quiet investments I'd built over the years. That was enough. I packed at my own pace. Each drawer, every shelf was filled with ghosts, echoes of a life that no longer belonged to me. I boxed what I needed, donated what I didn't, and stored the rest. I didn't call on friends. I didn't want sympathetic looks or to retell the same painful story. I was drained. I needed space, not to isolate, but to be alone on my terms. Solitude, not loneliness. There's a difference. When I pulled into the motel lot, the car was packed tight with boxes. My chest felt like it carried 100 pounds of sorrow. The lobby smelled faintly of cheap cleaning products and burned coffee. The woman behind the desk, probably in her early 30s, glanced up and said nothing at first. Then, as she passed me the room key, she asked gently, "Rough day?" I nodded. Divorce was finalized today. She hesitated a second before saying something I'll never forget. Not all endings mean you've failed. Sometimes they just mean you stopped pretending. I stood there stunned. She wasn't wrong. I didn't say anything back, just nodded and walked to my room. But her words stuck with me. Long after I dropped my bags, long after I stared at the ceiling on that thin motel mattress, they echoed. Had I been lying to myself all that time, hoping she'd become the woman I first fell for, hoping I could still reach her, even when maybe she no longer knew who she was herself? I stayed in that roadside motel for a couple of weeks. The woman at the desk never pried. She greeted me with a quiet nod or a soft morning whenever I passed through. A few times, she slid me a second coffee without a word. One evening, I sat on one of those cheap metal benches out front. She came out and sat beside me. By the time I moved into a new place, something had quietly formed between us. It wasn't romance, at least not yet. It was more like an unspoken understanding, a quiet companionship that didn't need explanation. After all the noise and emotional chaos of the past year, the quiet felt healing. When you've lived in the cold shadow of a lifeless relationship, even the smallest bit of warmth feels intense, like the first spring sunlight after a brutal winter. It's tempting to chase that feeling, to leap into something new. But this time I've learned to pause, to appreciate someone's presence without immediately trying to define it. The receptionist earned my quiet admiration, not because she asked for it, but because she offered grace with no expectation in return. That's why I held back. With her. With myself. As she once reminded me, not every ending signals defeat. Some mark the start of being honest with yourself. It took almost a year after everything unraveled for the truth to finally reach me. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like realizing the person you built a life around had already walked away in spirit long before the paperwork arrived. Her emotions had left the relationship well before her body followed suit. By then, I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I'd already come to terms with the fact that it was over. But truth doesn't wait for your permission. It shows up when it wants. Mine arrived unexpectedly over lunch with a mutual friend. That's when I found out Erica hadn't been alone on all those supposed girls' nights. She'd been seeing someone else before our marriage even ended. While I was holding on, she was already planning her escape. I was still trying to salvage the past. She was already writing her future. To her, our marriage was a draft she could toss once it stopped fitting her narrative. Apparently, she believed this other guy would deliver the excitement she felt I couldn't. But reality didn't unfold the way she imagined. Once the divorce was final, he didn't step up. He strung her along, said the right things, made promises that meant nothing. And when she finally wanted something real, something solid, he pulled away. It collapsed quickly, as things often do when built on dishonesty. We never spoke again. No calls, no emails, not a single apology. And to be honest, even if she had reached out, it wouldn't have made a difference. I had already sifted through the debris with my therapist, faced the hurt, the silence, the shame. I looked at every moment I stayed quiet, hoping love would somehow patch the cracks. I had to reckon not just with her betrayal, but with the ways I disappeared in trying to keep us afloat. In the aftermath, I moved through my days like a shadow. Everything felt raw. The memories echoed like open wounds. The silence screamed. But now, when I think back to the man who first checked into that rundown motel with a suitcase in one hand and heartbreak in the other, I barely recognize him. He sat on the edge of that bed, replaying everything, wondering if any of it had ever been real. That man isn't me anymore. Therapy shifted how I saw myself. It wasn't fast. I spent months pretending I was okay when I wasn't. But gradually, session by session, I started unwrapping feelings I hadn't even known I'd buried. My therapist helped me pick apart the guilt, the self-doubt, the belief that being left meant I wasn't enough. She helped me realize that someone failing to see your value doesn't mean you don't have any. That truth hit hard. The real transformation began when I stopped asking why she walked away and started asking what I actually deserve. I don't know if I'll ever get married again, not out of fear, but because I've learned how to be whole on my own. I've grown to like the quiet of my own space. Still, I'm open if the right person appears. Someone who sees me for who I am, not just what I can offer. Someone who doesn't treat me like a compromise, but a choice. I'm done with being just good enough to put up with. I want to be truly seen, treasured, loved, with no asterisks. So yes, the hurt is behind me. Not because I buried it, but because I confronted it. I don't carry bitterness anymore. Erica's place in my story is over. And that's okay. What matters is that I see myself clearly now. That chapter is finished. Thanks for reading. If this resonated with you, feel free to browse more stories on the channel. Until next time, take care of yourself.